Hello everybody and welcome back. This is the last video of our Hitler unit. We are going to be talking about the last bullet point, authoritarian control and the extent to which it was achieved. Now, because of the complexity of that bullet point, much like the previous video, this one might run a little longer than usual. It might run a little longer than 15 minutes. So, in order to understand this bullet point, and even in order for me to even teach this bullet point to you, we need to actually break down what it's talking about, what it means, and not just by definition, what it genuinely means. So when we look at this bullet point right here, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what does complete control mean? What does that actually mean? Does complete control mean that no one stands against me? That I have no opposition? That I can do whatever I want. I can murder as many people as I want without any repercussion. I can start a war and no one will fight against me. What does complete control mean? And you need to figure that out on your own, because that is going to be the basis for your argument. So we need to, at its core, think about what exactly is complete control. And the only way to do that is to look at truly the definition of control to build up from there. So if we look at control as a noun, that means it's the power to influence or direct people's behavior or the course of events. So Hitler did this with the Hitler Youth. He did this with the SS and the Gestapo, right? He used them and used his power to influence not only themselves but others in the military. He had all these policies towards women and minorities, social, cultural, economic, that directly impacted someone's behavior. So, yeah, I mean, to have control means you have power. What about as a verb, right? The verb to determine the behavior or to supervise the running of. So, as a noun, does Hitler have control? Yeah, he has control of the SS. He has the ability to influence or direct their actions. Now, does he control the country? Is he controlling everyone? Is he controlling the entire country? So these two in and of itself are what you need to decide as what your matrix is going to be, what your argument is going to be. So between these two different definitions, we can already see the varying degree that there is for complete control. And ultimately, we need to ask ourselves, how can we measure it? How are we going to measure control? Because, you know, in science and in mathematics, it's really easy to measure things, right? Where we have rulers and data and graphs and points and all of that. But for history, our data points are people's actions, people's emotions, people's deaths, unfortunately. We have our own hard numbers, right? Like we mentioned, with people dying and all of the really horrible things that occurred. But also, a diary is a data point. A propaganda poster is a data point. We can use that to infer and analyze certain things, especially if we have multiples that back up a proof point. So we need to determine what you're going to use to measure this. Are you going to measure control as a noun? Or are you going to measure control as a verb? And how does that work with Hitler? And this can be a very complicated question, because what complete control or what control in general means from person to person changes, right? And so, as some of us have learned in TOK and other of us, we're going to learn it now, and is it possible that anything could be fully something? Like, we know that things can be absolute, right? That 1 + 1 = 2, the earth is round, the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, right? These are absolute points. We know this is factual. This is a full thing. This is exactly what's going on. But in terms of humans, because of how complex we are, how different we are, can someone ever be fully hateful? Can someone be fully murderous? Can someone be fully sad? And in some degrees, yes, and in some degrees, no. But can anything ever be fully something of another? So I can be, all filled with sadness, but can I force my sadness onto someone else so that they're also sad? Can I control their emotional output with my sadness? And because people can walk away and because of things like that, it's very differentiating. So at the end of the day, in order for us to argue whether someone has complete control, or whether the country or the political party has complete control, we need to ask ourselves these questions and come to a decision. And in the video we're going to talk about today, or what we've been talking about, I'm going to show you the 3 answers to this question. Because there is 3 answers. There's yes, complete control was achieved. No, complete control was not achieved. And then there was to an extent. Like sometimes there was, sometimes there wasn't. So let's look at the first question. Here are all the examples you can use to argue that yes, Hitler had complete control of the country. With political policies, economic policies, historians argumenting the way he controls different groups of people, he does in fact have complete control. Right, let's walk this one by one. The Enabling Act gave him complete power of the government to pass the Gleichschaltung, which then enabled him to pass the press law, and both of these allowed him to target minority groups, allowed him to use and take full control of propaganda, allowed him to pass the Nuremberg race laws, enabled him to kill off his own people with the Night of the Long Knives and the SA, enabled him to create major organizations to shift education, the youth, the women, to work for him as propaganda tools. And his charismatic leadership enabled him to be able to publicly hang people and publicly execute people, and it standing more as a threat, or standing more as in some sense a celebration, rather than horrifying or scary or things of that nature. So each of these examples here can show explicitly how much Hitler did take complete control. That he did have full control of the government, the ability to kill people, the ability to kill people, the ability to kill people, the ability to control different people of his country and divide them, and had so much charisma that people were willing to work with him on this. So these 14 examples are the ideal argument to make in order to have complete control. Do you need to have all 14 of these examples? No. Do you need to have at least half of them? Absolutely. You need to talk about, if you're going to talk about politics, you need to talk about the Enabling Act, Gleichschaltung, the press law, propaganda, Nuremberg race law, and the Holocaust. Right? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 examples. That's a little under half. Right? In order to fully argue your point. And all of these examples, again, are just for, yes, Hitler had full control of the country. But for every, there's the opposite. Here are all the examples for that Hitler did not have full control of the country. Because, remember, complete control means complete control. It means absolute. The best argument against this are these right here. It's very short. It's a much shorter list. It's about 5 shorter, if I remember correctly, than the other one. But the argument is still there. Now let's walk these. The Gestapo. Although the Gestapo was Hitler's way at trying to control the public, they weren't big enough. They weren't strong enough. It was impossible for them to ever actually do things like that. The press, even in the final years of the war, 11 years later, they still didn't have complete control. There were still people who had their own power and their own propaganda they could put out. Then we have multiple people fighting against Hitler. The Schwarzkapelle, the White Rose, the Edelweiss, right? Two different youth groups attacking the Hitler Youth, attacking Hitler's government, and then the Schwarzkapelle of his own people attacking him in the July bomb plot. You know, if you have complete control, how do you almost die from an assassination attempt? That situation just happened to change. When we look at the fact that the degenerate art that they had, right, the fact that they had to show up art, they had to create a whole argument to control the culture, but at its core, people really didn't kind of care about it. The fact that the war, the impact of war, was unsustainable, and that they had to compromise their beliefs and put women back into the workforce, put women back into breaking their marital bonds. And the last one is the T4 program. Yes, the sterilization. Yes, that requires a lot of power to be able to kill people. But they had to stop the program because enough people were complaining. They had to stop their own actions because the people were already in an uproar against it. Right? Who's controlling whose action in that scenario? Yes, the Nazi government is killing off the defective people, but they had to stop because the people made them stop. So, it's a argument that's saying two things. One, complete control means no one stands against you, and we have 9 examples here where people stood against Hitler. And two, the argument is that it's impossible for anything to ever be complete. Now, what if you want to argue about something in between? And you're going to get a little anxiety induced on this, and I'm very sorry. But if you want to make an argument about that Hitler kind of did and kind of didn't, here are all the examples you could talk about. We have all the anti-examples, and then we have all the pro-examples. That is 33 examples that you could talk about that could counter each other, right? The fact that, these political policies enabled people to be suppressed, yet in spite of it, people rose up. And then from there, even though Hitler was able to use his force, and publicly execute people and separate them with the racial law, people still stood against them. People still fought in the T4. So when we think about this argument, it ultimately comes down to what you think or what your personal philosophy is when it comes to complete control. But you need to be able to argue that point tooth and nail. It needs to be very strict and very detailed. Does detail mean multiple examples? Not necessarily. And if I'm very honest with you, if you're arguing this one right here, if you're arguing the in-between, you need to have at least 10 examples. You can get away with 6, 7 examples for the argument for and the argument against. But if you're arguing in between, you need to at least have half of your paper come from one side and half of it come from the other side. You can't just dip a little bit in. So this last bullet point, it is very interesting and a very good discussion-based question on what is complete control and what does complete control mean if nothing can ever be complete, right? Based off of your own personal philosophy. And this concludes the Hitler Unit.